Hi everyone, I'm Taysa Brown. I'm the Silviculture Performance Assessment Specialist with the Forest Science Planning and Practices branch. In this presentation, I will be covering the use of ocular assessments, sometimes known as visual assessments, for free-growing forest cover updates and how you can demonstrate due diligence. So here's the outline. I'll quickly explain what a visual assessment is, and then I'll get into some of the challenges associated with the sampling method. I'll then highlight how our survey data is used and why good quality information is so important. Then I'll cover the expectations that apply when an ocular assessment is used. Lastly, I'll dive into the new suitability matrix that will help you gauge whether or not a visual assessment is appropriate. I'll then walk through several examples to show you how it works. Before we dive in, what exactly is a visual assessment? Well, it's a sampling method that's used to collect full forest cover information. Visual assessments can be done via walkthrough or a flyover in a helicopter or a low altitude flight with a drone. Now, it's important to emphasize that a visual assessment is different than a walkthrough or flyover that you might do to start a survey to determine the survey objective, sampling intensity, method, stratification, site index method, etc. With a visual assessment, you're collecting information for a silviculture and inventory label and for forest health reporting, but you're doing no or very few plots. As a result, this is not a structured method and it can be highly subjective. Now, you often hear foresters saying that they're only using ocular assessments on stands that are obviously free growing or stands that are a sea of green, and that does help reduce risk. But it's important to remember that surveys are used for so much more than just compliance checks now. So that can't be our only consideration. It might be easy to tell that a block is free growing, but it could be difficult to determine the inventory attributes. So for this example, the stand has a lot of trees, clearly, but it's not an easy inventory because you have dispersed mature layer 1 trees. It's definitely over 5 meters squared. So you would actually need to report a layer 1 inventory separate from your regenerating trees. So what are the biggest challenges? Well, I think the biggest one relates to forest health. It can be hard to detect that there's a forest health problem if you're flying above a block. Many forest health agents look similar. You need close-up samples to differentiate between them. For example, this chlorotic fir on the slide. Is this drought or disease? If so, which type? Or Swiss needlecast? Also, it can be difficult or impossible to apply the free-growing forest health damage criteria without being on the ground, which is necessary to properly determine free-growing densities and assess compliance. This is an issue because accurate forest health reporting is critical to determine whether free-growing stands will meet future forest management objectives and to determine if licensees are incorporating appropriate pest mitigation strategies into their silviculture prescriptions. Similarly, it's not possible to apply the geographic vegetation competition decision keys by air or while walking. So to meet free growing, licensees can end up getting pushed into brushing more than necessary. Next, if you have any dispersed retention, you just can't do the alternative survey methods that apply to complex vertical stands like cedrus, DFP, layered, and multi-storied by air or by walkthrough. Lastly, you could end up missing smaller trees. All trees are meant to be captured in your inventory total density and species composition, regardless of their size, quality, or forest health status. You're meant to collect what's there and not make any judgment calls on what will make it through to the next rotation. If you have natural info that's shorter than the brush or planted trees, they can be easily missed if you're 100 meters above the ground. So, why care if your surveys are accurate? Well, I just mentioned that surveys have more value than just providing a compliance check. They also inform prescriptions like site preparation, planting, brushing, spacing, pruning, etc. Then our reported survey information gets used by various program areas, some pulling from results, others pulling from the provincial inventory. That's because our inventory data from our surveys updates the Provincial Vegetation Resources Inventory, the VRI. Many different program areas like forest health, carbon, wildfire, wildlife, they all rely on the VRI. On top of that, your collected inventory labels are used in conjunction with planting information to initialize growth and yield models to project our stands forward into the future. These projections are then used for important decision-making, like timber supply review. Given the importance of survey information, the survey manual has always had strongly worded conditions for using visual and representative surveys. For example, the manual has clearly stated that if you use a representative or visual assessment, your results need to be comparable to what would be collected with a grid or vector survey. Similarly, your results need to be reproducible. Another experienced surveyor should come up with the same forest cover labels and stalking status determination. And lastly, you need to make sure that you can meet your legal requirements. FPPR, the Forest Planning and Practices Regulation, Section 86.6, requires information, like your forest cover, to be reported in a form and manner that is satisfactory to the minister. The form and manner is specified in the RIS, the Results Information Submission Specifications, and I'll cover that over the next 2 slides. Okay, like I just mentioned, you need to be able to meet the reporting standards outlined in the RIS to meet regulatory requirements. The RIS outlines expectations for the forest cover polygon, inventory, and silviculture components. It also explains the requirements to report stands with greater than 5 meters square per hectare as multi-layer. Depending on the stand, some of these attributes would be challenging to impossible to determine without boots on the ground. You also need to be able to meet the results precision standards, which are at the back of the RIS. So, if an auditor is doing a ground survey, will your total density be within plus or minus 20% of the ministry estimate? Or will your total density be off because you didn't see the smaller trees obscured by brush or by taller trees? Or another example, what if an auditor finds laminated root disease and you didn't find any? Depending on the incidence, you might fail the pest infection standard. You'd also likely fail the free growing density standard since laminated root disease has such a high net down multiplier. And because of that, you might even get the stalking status incorrect. On top of the RIS, you also have to meet the FPPC standards of ethical and professional conduct because surveys fall under professional forestry. I want to highlight the due diligence standard in particular. To meet it, you must work with constant and careful attention, and your work must be complete, correct, and clear. And the guidelines for interpretation, they explain that to mean free of errors and omissions and meeting all legal requirements. They also say sufficient data was collected in a manner that adhered to required standards. Given that, good quality data is clearly important, but safety does come first. So I have to mention the FPPC Standard 7. All registrants must maintain safe work practices and consider the safety of workers in the practice of professional forestry. That's an important consideration when picking a sampling methodology, and it's actually the most common reason for conducting aerial assessments on the coast. So, as a professional, how can you demonstrate due diligence when choosing a sampling methodology and conducting surveys? Well, first, only use ocular assessments where suitable. For example, they're an appropriate sampling methodology for your non-legal surveys. So use them when you're doing a check-in survey to see how the stand is developing towards free growing. Use them to map out treatment areas for replanting, brushing, or spacing. Use them after a treatment to check on the efficacy of the treatment. But at free growing, you need to much more carefully consider whether ocular assessments are suitable. This is especially applicable for aerial methods like helicopter or drone surveys. To help with that, we've now created a due diligence suitability matrix, and I'll go over how that works over the next few slides. Now, if the matrix indicates that it's suitable to try an ocular assessment, then you need to make sure that you're doing the best job possible. And to help with this, we've also developed some best management practices, which are listed in the 2025 Silviculture Survey Procedures Manual. Okay, so like I just mentioned, the suitability matrix is intended as a tool to help you demonstrate due diligence. We don't want surveyors just defaulting to aerial assessments at free growing. We want professionals to carefully consider their choice of sampling method. So with this matrix, there's a bunch of rows covering different aspects of the site, stand, and last survey. For each one, you select the option that most applies for your standards unit. It then gives you a total point value. If it's greater than 100 points, then it's reasonable to attempt a drone or helicopter survey for free growing. If it's less than 100 points, then grid or vector sampling is recommended for free growing. Now, as a professional, you can disregard that recommendation. However, if you do, it'd be advisable to write a short professional quality rationale as to why. I do need to highlight that this matrix is supposed to apply specifically for aerial methods and for free growing surveys. Okay, I want to quickly show you how the spreadsheet works and the structure of it. So you'll see that the spreadsheet accounts for many site and stand attributes, featured from the last survey, and characteristics associated with the planned survey. For every single row, there's always a few options to choose from, and you're expected to pick the one that most closely aligns with your standards unit. And for that option, you have to highlight in yellow the associated numeric field. So for example, if our standards unit is not accessible, then this would apply. Block not accessible, helicopter, truck, quad, boat, or walk-in. You would need to highlight the field with 500. Now that's important because the spreadsheet sums up the numeric values that are highlighted in yellow to give you the total right here. So if you highlight words, it won't sum properly. If you highlight in any color other than yellow, it won't work properly. Now, if you hate yellow, you can change the color by changing this cell's highlight. And then for the rest of the spreadsheet, you just have to use the same color. Now, the spreadsheet works this way because I'm using a workbook sum by color function. There is one glitch I just need to raise. It doesn't automatically update as you make changes. So once you fully fill out this whole spreadsheet, you then want to go into the cell and you then have to click in this bar right here so that B31 highlights in blue. And you see that it's outlined in blue right here. And then you just have to press enter and then it updates. So for example, right now it's at 350. If I switch this, it hasn't updated. I click in here, I click up in this bar next to the formula, I click enter, and now we went from 350 to minus 150, which makes sense because we went from 500 points to 0. Now, once you get this point value updated, there will also be a recommendation just below that, and it uses an if-then formula. So if you have less than 100 points and we're negative points, then the recommendation is going to be plot survey is recommended. If you have over 100 points, then it's going to say visual assessment is suitable. Now, if you want to disregard the recommendation, there is space for a rationale right here. Okay, I want to just review a few more formatting items. So first, you've probably noticed that some of the text is green and some of the text is red. I use these font colors on some of the fields that would be key drivers in whether or not an ocular assessment is suitable. So for example, right up top, these green fields, there were 300 and 500 points. If either of those applied, it's likely that you'd earn 100 points overall. In contrast, these red fields are worth negative 200 and negative 300 points. Unless one or several of these green fields apply, it'd be hard to offset these negative points to earn at least 100 points overall. I also want to highlight that I have a large number of comments throughout the spreadsheet. Some provide instructions or guidance. So for example, for average slope, it says to interpret that as being the typical slope percent for the SU. Or for locally known safety issues, it indicates that you should be assigning a point value for any known safety issues specific to the SU, and to only consider safety issues that aren't addressed through some of the other fields like previous stand type, harvest method, and average slope. Now, other comments explain why the characteristic is an important consideration, or sometimes they rationalize the point values. So for example, for this field, I explained that you earn more positive points and more points in general for older trees because they're easier to see. They're more likely to meet minimum heights and brush ratios. Forest health has expressed at older ages typically. Also, assigning more points for older stands accounts for rising safety issues associated with older blocks, like worsening visibility and access and decaying slash. Okay, I'm now going to explain how the spreadsheet works by actually running through a few examples. All right, for our first example, I'm going to show you a fairly low-risk block. It had good stats, low force health hazard, low species diversity, high total density, and a fairly recent survey. Okay, I still have a couple highlighted fields, so I'm just going to blank them out, and now let's begin. Starting at the top, we have access. This block had good road access, so we can say it's accessible by truck or quad, so it's 0 points. Where it is 0, we actually don't need to highlight it. It's just if it's a positive or a negative value. The same is true for the next row, safety. The site didn't have any special safety concerns, so it's also going to be a 0. Next, total survey hectares. This is 13, so we're going to get 5 points for that. And then after that, we have slope. Our slopes are on average 60%, so 20 points. And then this is an old growth coastal block, so we get 10 points. And the split between old growth interior versus coastal is just addressing the size of the slash and recognizing that it's typically larger on the coast, which can just make moving through the block more difficult and more risky when it's starting to decay and you're getting to these older ages. Next, we have the harvest method. This was logged with grapple, so 15 points. So again, when you're using a grapple system versus a ground-based system, you have higher quantities of slash, and tying in with slope percent, you typically have steeper cut banks, taller cut banks. And then lastly, ICH, note we're in the VM1, so this does not apply. This ICH row is specifically addressing for the provincial forest health specialist concerns. They were heavily involved in developing the matrix, and they were adamant that they do not want ocular assessments happening in the ICH. So now moving into the last survey results category. Our last plot survey happened 5 years ago. So we get 25 points for that. The trees at the time were 5, so we get 15 points for that. We don't have any dispersed mature trees in our block, and the stand was planted, and our last survey showed an SR status, so that's 0, 0, and 0. Next up, we have to look at the actual stats from our last survey, starting off with our LCL. So for this SU, our LCL was 680, and our MSS, or minimum stocking standard, was 500. So we go 680 divided by 500, and we get 1.4. So for that, we get 20 points. And then we have to do our mean divided by the TSS. So our mean actually is 850. Our TSS is 900. So that's 0.9. So we get 10 points. Next, stand type. This is a conifer stand, and we have only 2 species, hemlock and cedar. So 5 points for that. Now moving into our planned survey, we are hoping to use a helicopter, so -15. Our anticipated total density is 4,000 stems per hectare. That's what it was at the last survey, and there hasn't been any brushing treatments or thinning treatments. For these next 2 fields, next 2 rows, you only fill out one of them, whichever one applies. So our stand is not pine or fir leading, so we don't fill out this row, we'll fill out this row. So our expected leading silviculture species is going to be hemlock, and they should be 10 years old. So we don't earn any points for that. And then for these next 3 fields, we do not expect to be fir leading for the inventory, or western white pine leading, or lodgepole pine. So that's 0, 0, and 0. So the last thing to do now is just to make sure that our total field has updated. So to do that, we click here, we click in the toolbar so that B31 turns blue, and so that this yellow field is outlined in blue. And then we hit enter, and it actually did update appropriately without having to do that. But always do the double check. So overall, our total score is 130, and the spreadsheet says that a visual assessment is suitable to attempt. And this makes sense. It is quite low risk. And there are some safety considerations just around the steepness of the block, the fact that it's old growth. You could do a plot survey. You can physically get there, but the risk is low enough that you can at the very least attempt an ocular assessment, and then based on what you see, then maybe you would go throw additional plots if conditions aren't as good as the last survey indicated. Okay, for this next example, we're looking at a stand with an out-of-date forest cover where plots would be nice at free growing, but there's truly no access. It's mid-coast, it's a hilly block, pads are overgrown, or maybe they were smashed, and there's just no walk-in route. So you have no choice but to use an ocular assessment. So I just want to show you how the spreadsheet works in this type of situation. And again, remind you that we now have best management practices written into the 2025 survey manual. So please follow those if you're in this situation, or frankly, any situation where you're using a heli or drone survey. Okay, this example is really meant to highlight how if one of these green fields is highlighted, it's very likely that an ocular assessment can be attempted. So first up, we have access. Like I already mentioned, we have absolutely no access to this block. A helicopter can't land and you can't walk in. So right off the bat, you have 500 points. It's going to be really hard to offset that now. So next, there's no specific safety issues that aren't addressed by these other fields. So that's 0. It's small at just 5 hectares, so that's 50. The slope is 30%, so no points for that. And it is old growth coastal, being CWH VH1. And it was a heli block, 30 points. We're not in the ICH. The last plot survey was 10 years ago, so that's minus 50. And the trees at the time were just 2, so minus 20. No dispersed basal area. Last status, it was planted, and last status was SR, so 0, 0, 0. The LCL from the last plot survey was 610. Again, recognizing this was a very long time ago. And the MSS was 500, so that's 1.2, so no points for that. And the mean was 700, and the TSS was 900. So 0.8, so 0 points for that. It's a conifer stand, and there's just 2 species, cedar and hemlock. We'd like to use a helicopter, so negative 15. Total density is quite low, just 1,400, so 0 points for that. And then our leading free-growing species will be cedar, so we don't fill out this row, we fill out this one, and the trees will be 12, so we get 20 points for that. And then none of these apply. We're not fir or pine leading in any way. And so we come down, we click in the top bar, and we have 530 points. So even though there is some risk associated with the survey, having only an out-of-date plot survey to look at, given there truly is no access, a visual assessment is recommended. Or maybe not recommended, it is suitable. It's appropriate to use. Okay, for our next example, we're looking at a stand for leading in the XM2. And for this stand, the survey is going to say that a plot survey is recommended. There's no safety issues, no access issues. And for the entire XM2, there's a high hazard for armillaria and laminated root disease. And fir is a susceptible species. On top of that, for fir leading stands, we are looking still for Swiss needle cast needle retention data, and that simply cannot be collected if you're using a drone or a helicopter survey. Okay, let's quickly fill this out. So once again, I blinked out the matrix. This SU, it's accessible, reasonable with normal safety measures. It's 35 hectares, 30% slopes, second growth. It was ground-based logging, and we're in the CWH XM. So far, all zeros. There was a plot survey 4 years ago, so we get plus 25 for that. And the trees at the time were 5 years old, sorry. So 15 points for that. There was no dispersed basal area. The block was planted, and the last status was SR, so 0, 0, 0. I've already entered in the numbers here. Our LCL at the last survey was 790, and our MSS is 500, so that's 1.6. So we get 20 points for that. And our mean was 850. Our TSS is 900, so we get 0.9 for that. So, sorry, that calculates to 0.9, so we get 10 points. It's a conifer stand, and at the last survey, there were 3 tree species. We're hoping to use a helicopter, so that's negative 15. And next, we have anticipated total density. So this block has been brushed, so we just need to account for that. So the last survey was 4,000 stems per hectare. 10% of those trees were alder. The brushing treatment happened 3 years ago. The survey was 4 years ago. So at minimum, you can expect that the density has gone down by 400 stems per hectare, so 3,600 now. So we're within this range, so 20 points.
This is a fir leading block, so we fill out this row. And our fir trees are 9 years old. So -10 for that. We don't have to fill out this row. Our inventory will be probably 80+% Doug fir, and we're in the XM, so we get -50 for that. And that's really accounting for the forest health hazard associated with the XM, for root disease, and also the need for collecting needle retention data on Douglas fir leading stands to help us better understand Swiss needle cast hazard. And we don't have any pine. So we click within this field so that this field, the yellow one, is outlined in yellow, and so that the B31 shows in blue, and then we press enter. And in total, we get 15 points. So a plot survey is recommended. Now, I think an important thing to note, a lot of blocks in the XM are quite similar. Good access, safe, and Douglas fir leading. So if that's true for you, maybe you don't have to fill this out for every single block. You can just know a plot survey is probably going to be recommended. Unless you have something that is crazy different, one of these green fields, you can probably just go ahead in planning a plot survey. If you wish to follow the BMPs, if you are going to disregard that, then I would fill this out and write your rationale here.
For our fourth example, we're looking at a block where you could do a plot survey. It'll just cost you more because it requires a heli drop-off or a walk-in. So given that, is it reasonable to attempt a heli survey? Well, I think no, and that's what the spreadsheet will also show because the last survey was 7 years ago, and at the time, they had borderline stalking. The mean was 570 free growing well-spaced stems per hectare, and the LCL was 460. So to BSR, they would have had to have max plotted it.
Okay, so here's our spreadsheet. I've again blanked it out. So at the top, we start off with access. So this was a 45-minute walk. Helicopter can land. So that would put us in this category. A helicopter can land and the walk-in is less than an hour. So we get 30 points for that. There's no safety concerns that aren't covered in the other row, so 0 for that. Our total survey hectares, the block is 13, so 5 points. The block, 65% slope, so it's definitely getting up there, 20 points. It's old growth coastal, and it was grapple logged. We're not in the ICH. Our last plot survey was 7 years ago, so -10. And the trees at the time were 3 years old, so 0 points for that. There is no dispersed basal area. The block was planted, and while borderline, it was SR at the last survey. So next, we have to do our LCL. So the LCL was 460. So that gives us 0.9. So that gives us -60 right there. And then our mean was 570. Target 900. So that gives us 0.6. So that is also -10. Our stand type objective, we're trying to manage for conifers. And at our last survey, we had 4 species: hemlock, balsam, yellow cedar, and red cedar. So -5 points, given it starts to become a more complicated survey, trying to distinguish between the yellow cedar and the red cedar and just all of the species in total. So we were hoping to use a helicopter survey, so that'd be -15. And at our last survey, we had 3,000 stems per hectare, so +20. The trees would be 10 years old now because they were 3 at the time, and the last survey was 7 years ago. So that's that's 0 because we are not fir or pine leading, so 0 points. And we're not fir, pine, or pine. So we now need to get the total to update. So we click in the top bar, and press enter, and we come out exactly at 0. So a plot survey is recommended.
For our final example, we're doing another block that involves a short walk-in. This time it's less than 15 minutes, but a helicopter can't land. This block has the same stats as example 4. So again, it was borderline at the last survey. They had to max plot. The difference this time is that the helicopter can't land and we're on Walburn Island. So we have extreme grizzly hazard. So how does that play into your decision on whether or not visual assessment is suitable? So let's work through the example.
Okay, let's work through this final example. So starting off with access. So again, short walk-in, less than 15 minutes, but a helicopter can't land. So that's going to put us into this category. Um, Lots of different options in here, but the last one is walk-in less than 15 minutes, but helicopter can't land. So we get 60 points just on that basis. Now, this next row is safety. So do you consider this site to be reasonable with regular safety measures in place? Or is there something additional? Well, I think the grizzly hazard warrants a lot of points. Walburn Island is notorious for grizzlies. Depending on the age of the site, I'd be highly concerned sending surveyors in here. I don't know that it's necessarily worth the risk. So I'm going to throw out 350 points. Someone else might think that it should be higher or lower. This field does leave room for professional discretion and for local level knowledge. So we'll just see how that works. So you enter it in and then highlight it yellow. Next, total survey hectares. So this was 17 hectares. So no points for that. The slope was gentle, only 25%, so 0 points for that. This was old growth coastal, 10 points. And it was ground-based harvesting, so 0 points. And we're not in the ICH. So the last survey was 9 years ago, so that's negative 50. And the trees at the time of the survey were only 2, so negative 20. So a really out-of-date forest cover. There's no dispersed basal area, and the stand was planted, so 0 points. And with max plotting, it was SR, but it was an uncertain stalking decision before it was max plotted. So now we look at the stats. So the last survey, the LCL was 460. So we already have that number in here, so 0.9, so that's negative 60 points. And our mean was 570, so I believe that's already in here. Yeah, 570 divided by 900 gives us 0.6, so that gives us negative 10. And we're managing for conifers, and we have just 2 species, hemlock and cedar, so 5 points. So we're trying to use a helicopter, negative 15. Our density at the last survey was 1,000. There's been no spacing, no brushing, so expect it to still be in that range. So less than 1,200, negative 10. We're not fir pine, so we need to pick from this row, and our trees should be 11 years old now, so 0. We're not fir, we're not western white pine, or lodgepole pine. So we now need to update this. So we click in the top bar till it turns blue, click enter, and we end up at 260. So despite the fact that this is a more risky block and it might be more borderline, closer to that minimum stalking standard, I still think a visual assessment is warranted given the risk associated with the terrain and the grizzlies. So the spreadsheet does reflect that. It shows that visual assessment is suitable to attempt. And again, the key thing here is extreme grizzly hazard and the helicopter can't land.
Okay, that's a wrap. If you have any questions on how to use the spreadsheet, or if you have feedback on the categories or the point values, please reach out. My email is on the slide. Also, I just need to mention that the spreadsheet is linked in the 2025 Silviculture Survey Procedures Manual, and it will also be posted on the Silviculture Survey Reference Documents webpage. Thanks so much for watching this training session, and happy surveying.